Captain Elias Voss had spent most of his life among the stars. He knew the hum of his ship, the Wayfarer, like the rhythm of his own heartbeat. It was an old but reliable cargo hauler, built for long journeys through the vast emptiness of space. He didn't carry passengers. He didn't like surprises. But today, his ship had both. It started with a sound, small, almost unnoticeable, a faint rustling from the storage bay. Elias frowned. He was alone. He always double-checked his ship before takeoff, and nothing was supposed to move back there. Grabbing his blaster, just in case, he moved toward the storage bay door. It slid open with a hiss, revealing stacks of supply crates, spare parts, and sealed containers. Everything was in place, except for one thing. A shadow shifted behind the crates. Someone was there. Elias narrowed his eyes. "Come out," he ordered. "Now." For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, a figure stepped forward. It was a girl, but not human. She was small, barely reaching Elias's shoulder, with delicate features and smooth iridescent skin that shimmered between deep blue and violet under the dim lights. Her eyes were large, glowing faintly like twin moons. Strange markings ran along her arms, pulsing softly like they were alive. Elias tightened his grip on his blaster. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head, watching him with a curious expression. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. "I've been following you for a long time," she said. Elias blinked. That was not the answer he expected. "Following me," he repeated, lowering his blaster just a little. "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced around the storage bay, as if making sure they were alone. Then she looked back at him. "Because you are important." Elias let out a dry chuckle. "Lady, I'm a cargo pilot, not some galactic hero." The girl stepped closer, her glowing eyes studying him. "Not yet." Elias sighed. He didn't have time for this. Stowaways were trouble, no matter where they came from. If the wrong people found her on his ship, it could mean heavy fines, or worse. "What's your name?" he asked. "Celery," she said. "All right, Celery. You picked the wrong ship. I don't do passengers, and I definitely don't do mysterious alien girls sneaking aboard." Celery smiled again, like she knew something he didn't. "And yet, you haven't thrown me out." Elias scowled. She wasn't wrong. He should have thrown her off the moment he found her. Instead, he was standing here, asking questions. That was dangerous. He sighed and rubbed his temple. "How did you get in here anyway?" "I slipped past security at the last station," she said. "It wasn't hard." Elias cursed under his breath. He had refueled at Port Kesson, a neutral trade hub. Security there was weak, but still, she had made it aboard without him noticing. That was impressive and concerning. "All right, fine," he said. "You're here. Now tell me why. What do you want from me?" Celery hesitated. "Not here," she whispered. "They might be listening." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Before she could answer, the ship's alarm blared. "Incoming transmission. Unidentified. Scifi. Elias ran to the cockpit and pulled up the scanner. His stomach tightened. 3 warships had just entered the system. Sleek black vessels with glowing red insignias. He knew that symbol. Sci-Fi Dominion. The most feared force in the galaxy. A sharp chill ran down his spine. The Sci-Fi didn't patrol random trade routes. They hunted people. Elias turned to Celery. She stood silently, watching the ships with a calm expression. Too calm. "This is about you, isn't it?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Yes." Elias cursed again. He had a bad feeling about this. A voice crackled over the comm system, cold and mechanical. "Unknown vessel, this is the Sci-Fi Dominion. You are harboring a fugitive. Surrender them immediately, or be destroyed." Elias clenched his fists. He didn't know who Celery really was or why the Sci-Fi wanted her. But one thing was clear. If he turned her over, she was as good as dead. And if he didn't? He looked at the warships on his screen. 3 against 1. His cargo hauler wasn't built for combat. But he had one advantage. He was a damn good pilot. He glanced back at Scifi. She watched him calmly, as if she already knew what he was going to do. Elias sighed. He was going to regret this. "Buckle up, lady," he muttered, gripping the controls. "Things are about to get messy." Then, with a sharp turn and a burst of speed, the Wayfarer dove into the vast unknown. The Wayfarer shuddered as Captain Elias Voss pushed the engines to their limit. The ship's metal frame groaned, warning him that it wasn't built for such sudden acceleration. But right now, he didn't care. 3 Sci-Fi Dominion warships were on his tail, and if they caught him, it was over. Elias stole a quick glance at Scifi, the strange alien girl who had snuck onto his ship. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, completely calm, her glowing eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of them. "You better have a good reason for dragging me into this," Elias muttered, gripping the controls. Scifi didn't look at him. "If I told you, would it change what you're doing?" Elias exhaled sharply. She was right. He wasn't the type to hand over someone just because a powerful empire told him to. Especially when the Zephyr were involved. The comm system crackled to life. "Wayfarer, you are harboring a fugitive," a cold, mechanical voice declared. "Surrender immediately or be terminated." Elias smirked. "Yeah, I heard you the first time," he muttered before switching off the transmission. He didn't negotiate with threats. The warships were getting closer. The Zephyr ships were sleek, deadly, and far more advanced than his old cargo hauler. If they got a weapons lock, he wouldn't stand a chance. Elias checked his star map. They were near the Vortex Nebula, a chaotic region of swirling energy storms and gravitational distortions. No sane pilot would fly through it. But then again, Elias never claimed to be sane. "Hold on," he warned. With a sudden jerk, he sent the Wayfarer into a steep dive, heading straight for the glowing clouds of the nebula. The ship rocked violently as they entered. Bright flashes of electric storms danced outside the cockpit window. The gravity fluctuations made the ship shake, and Elias fought hard to keep control. "Are you insane?" Scifi asked, finally showing some concern. Elias grinned. "Depends who you ask." Behind them, the Zephyr warships hesitated at the nebula's edge. Their pilots knew this place was a death trap, but after a moment, they followed. "They're coming," Scifi said. Elias wasn't surprised. The Zephyr were ruthless. They wouldn't let a little thing like certain death stop them. "Then we make it difficult for them," Elias said. He flipped a switch, activating the ship's countermeasures. Small decoy drones shot out from the Wayfarer, creating false sensor signals. The warship's scanners would struggle to track them now. For a few minutes it worked. The Zephyr ships slowed down, confused by the multiple targets. But then a warning alarm blared through the cockpit. Missile lock detected. Elias's heart pounded. One hit, and they were done. Thinking fast, he pulled the ship into a tight barrel roll, narrowly dodging the missile as it shot past them. It exploded against a storm cloud, sending a pulse of energy through the nebula. The entire ship shuddered. "We can't keep this up," Scifi shouted. Elias knew she was right. They had to escape. Fast. "Can you do anything?" he asked. He still didn't fully understand what she was, but she had managed to sneak onto his ship undetected. Maybe she had other useful tricks. Scifi hesitated. Then she closed her eyes. The glowing markings on her arms pulsed brighter. The air around her seemed to hum. Elias didn't know what she was doing, but suddenly the ship's warning system lit up again. Gravitational shift detected. A massive energy vortex was forming ahead, larger than any Elias had ever seen. "You made that happen?" Elias asked, gripping the controls. Scifi opened her eyes. "No, I only saw the possibility. You have to trust me." Elias exhaled. Trusting a stranger wasn't usually his style. But right now, he didn't have another choice. "All right," he said. "Hold on tight." He aimed the Wayfarer straight for the swirling vortex. It was a crazy move, maybe even suicidal. But if they could survive the turbulence, the Sci-Fi ships wouldn't dare follow. The ship plunged into the vortex. The entire cockpit shook violently. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. Elias gritted his teeth, fighting to keep control. Behind them, the Sci-Fi ships hesitated again. The vortex was unstable, unpredictable. This time, they didn't follow. Then, with a final burst of speed, the Wayfarer shot out of the other side of the nebula, alive. The ship lurched as Elias finally stabilized it. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Scifi looked back at the nebula, then at Elias. "You're a good pilot." Elias smirked. "I know." The comm system beeped. The Sci-Fi were gone. For now. Elias turned to Scifi. "Now tell me the truth. Why are they after you?" Scifi hesitated. Then she said, "Because I have something they fear." Elias narrowed his eyes. He had a feeling things were only going to get more complicated. And for some reason, he wasn't sure he minded. The Wayfarer drifted silently through the darkness of space, far from the Vortex Nebula, where Elias had barely escaped the Sci-Fi dominion. His ship's engines hummed at low power, giving them time to rest. But Captain Elias Voss wasn't resting. He leaned against the control panel, arms crossed, studying the strange girl sitting in the co-pilot's seat, Scifi. She sat still, her glowing eyes fixed on the stars outside the window. Her iridescent skin shimmered faintly under the soft cockpit lights. Elias had never seen anything like her before. "You ready to tell me the truth now?" he asked, breaking the silence. Scifi finally looked at him. "I already told you," she said. "The Zephyr are after me." Elias let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I noticed. But that's not the truth. That's just part of it." He leaned closer. "Who are you really, and why are they willing to chase us into a death trap just to get you back?" Scifi hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain, like she was deciding how much to say. Then she took a slow breath. "I am the last of the Lumai." Elias frowned. "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have," she said quietly, "because the Sci-Fi erased us." The way she said it sent a chill down Elias's spine. He had heard stories before, entire civilizations wiped out by powerful empires. The Zephyr were known for it, but he had never met a survivor. "They destroyed my people," Scifi continued, "hunted us across the stars. I was just a child when it happened. I don't even remember my home. But I remember the fear. I remember the ships that came for us." She looked at Elias, her glowing eyes filled with something deep, something old. "And I remember the reason why they did it." Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. What reason? Scifi raised her hand, and the markings on her arms pulsed with light. The air in the cockpit shimmered. For a second, Elias thought he was seeing things. Ghostly shapes flickered around them, echoes of a past long gone. Then it was gone. Elias blinked. What was that? Scifi lowered her hand. The Lumai were different from other species. We didn't just see the present. We could see possibilities, the threads of time, the echoes of what might be. She paused. The Zephyr feared that. Elias exhaled. "So you're telling me you can see the future?" Scifi shook her head. "Not exactly. The future isn't fixed. I see paths, choices that lead to different outcomes. Some are strong, some are weak. But one thing was certain. The Sci-Fi Dominion saw something in our visions that terrified them." Elias frowned. "What did they see?" Scifi hesitated again. Then she said, "They saw you." Elias stared at her. "Me?" She nodded. "Not just you. Humanity." Elias let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Come on, lady. I'm just a cargo pilot." Scifi didn't smile. And yet you saved me when you could have turned me in. You flew into a deadly nebula with nothing but your instincts. And you survived. Her glowing eyes studied him. The Zifar have ruled the stars for centuries. But in every path I have seen, there is one thing they cannot stop. Elias swallowed. What? Salari's voice was barely a whisper. The rise of humanity. A silence stretched between them. Elias wasn't sure what to say. He had heard people talk about humanity's potential before, how humans spread faster than any species, how they adapted to any world. But to hear it from a girl who could glimpse the future, that was different. You're saying the Zifar are afraid of us? Elias finally asked. Not of what you are now, Salari said, but of what you will become. Elias ran a hand through his hair. Great. So now I've got a galactic empire after me because of something I haven't even done yet. Salari gave him a small, knowing smile. Not yet. Elias sighed. He had a bad habit of getting into trouble. But this was next-level trouble. The ship's console beeped, snapping him back to reality. A proximity alert. Elias checked the scanner. His stomach tightened. A Zifar probe. Small, but dangerous. If it sent out a signal, their location would be compromised. Salari leaned forward. They found us. Elias cursed under his breath. He had to act fast. His fingers flew over the controls, locking onto the probe. He fired. A single pulse blast. The probe exploded in a burst of light. For a moment, there was silence. Then Salari whispered, "It's too late. They know we're here." Elias clenched his jaw. He checked the long-range scanners. More ships were coming. Fast. He turned to Salari. "All right, prophecy girl. You saw the possibilities. What do we do now?" Salari's eyes glowed brighter as she whispered, "We find the ones who will fight back." Elias didn't like where this was going, but he had already made his choice the moment he refused to hand her over. With a deep breath, he pushed the engines forward. The Wayfarer shot into the unknown. The Wayfarer roared through the dark void of space, its engines burning bright as Elias Voss pushed the ship as fast as it could go. The Zifar Dominion was coming, and he needed a plan. Fast. Salari sat beside him, calm as always. Her glowing eyes studied the holographic star map in front of her. "You said we need to find people who will fight back," Elias said, gripping the controls. "Who exactly are we looking for?" Salari traced her fingers over the map. "There is a place, hidden from most eyes, a place where those who resist the Zifar gather." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You mean a rebel base?" Salari nodded. "Not just rebels. Fighters. Survivors. Outcasts. All those who refuse to kneel." Elias sighed. He wasn't the hero type. He was a pilot, a smuggler, and sometimes a troublemaker. But going up against the Zifar, that was another level of crazy. Then again, he had already crossed that line when he saved Salari. "All right," he said. "Where do we find them?" Salari's glowing fingers hovered over a distant star system, the Broken Reach. Elias frowned. He had heard of it before. An old battleground, long abandoned. The lawless region where criminals and mercenaries roamed free. If there were rebels there, they wouldn't be easy to find. "Great," Elias muttered. "A war zone. Just what I wanted." But he didn't slow down. Instead, he adjusted the ship's course and punched the engines to full power. The Broken Reach. Hours later, the Wayfarer dropped out of hyperspace, and the sight before them was breathtaking. A graveyard of dead ships, floating like silent ghosts. Elias whistled. Well, that's welcoming. The Broken Reach was a system littered with the wreckage of old battles. Destroyed warships, shattered space stations, and forgotten debris drifted endlessly. But beneath the wreckage, something was alive. Salari's eyes glowed softly. They are watching us. Elias checked the scanners. She was right. Hidden among the debris were ships, small, fast, and heavily armed. They were not Sci-Fi, but they weren't friendly either. Before Elias could react, his comm system crackled to life. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Rowe of the Freeborn Resistance. State your business or be destroyed. Elias glanced at Salari. This your contact? She nodded. They will listen if you tell them who I am. Elias wasn't sure about that, but he didn't have a better option. He activated the comms. This is Captain Elias Voss of the Wayfarer. I've got someone important on board. Someone the Sci-Fi want dead. Silence. Then the voice returned, sharper this time. Bring your ship to Dock 17. Try anything suspicious, and we'll blast you to pieces. Elias sighed. Well, that went better than expected. Salari gave him a small smile. You are better at this than you think. Elias wasn't so sure about that, but he followed the instructions, guiding the Wayfarer through the debris field until they reached a hidden space station. A massive structure built from old ship parts, floating like a forgotten fortress. As soon as they docked, armed soldiers surrounded the ship. Elias raised his hands. Easy, guys. No need for blasters. The leader of the group stepped forward. A tall woman with a scar across her cheek, wearing a tattered captain's coat. She looked tough, the kind of person who had survived too many battles. I'm Captain Rowe, she said. Her eyes flickered to Salari. And you're the girl they're hunting, aren't you? Salari met her gaze. Yes. Rowe didn't look convinced. You better have a good reason for bringing the Sci-Fi straight to our doorstep. Elias stepped in. Listen, lady, I didn't ask for this mess, but I've seen what she can do. She's not just another fugitive. She's important. Salari took a step forward. I know why the Sci-Fi fear me, and I know why they fear humanity. The room went silent. Elias could see it on their faces, the same doubt he had felt when she first told him, but also hope. Rowe studied Salari for a long moment. Then she spoke. The Zephyr crushed every rebellion before it could start, she said. They burned our homes, scattered our forces. We've been fighting a losing war. Salari's voice was steady. That can change. Rowe raised an eyebrow. And how do you know that? Salari's glowing eyes flickered. Because I have seen it. Another silence. Then Rowe exhaled. All right, she said. Let's see if you're as special as you claim. She turned to her soldiers. Get them inside. And someone prepare a meeting. We've got a war to plan. Elias sighed. He had a feeling his quiet life was officially over. But as he followed Rowe and Salari deeper into the station, he couldn't help but wonder. If Salari was right, then maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. A chance to fight. A chance to win. The air inside the hidden rebel base was thick with tension. Elias Voss could feel it in the way people stared at him and Salari. The rebels didn't trust them yet. He didn't blame them. Elias and Salari followed Captain Rowe through the dimly lit corridors. The station was a patchwork of old ships welded together, a fortress of survivors. The rebels had carved out a home here, hidden from the Sci-Fi Dominion. But for how long? They entered a large chamber, filled with leaders from different groups, hardened soldiers, smugglers, exiled captains, and freedom fighters. The War Council. Rowe stood at the head of the room. All right, let's make this quick. The Sci-Fi are closing in. We don't have time for games. She turned to Salari. Tell them what you told me. Salari stepped forward, her glowing eyes scanning the room. I am Lumai, the last of my kind, and I know why the Sci-Fi fear us. The room went silent. Some looked doubtful. Others leaned forward, curious. A man with a cybernetic arm scoffed. You expect us to believe that? The Sci-Fi crushed every rebellion we started. They have fleets, weapons, armies. What do you have? Salari met his gaze. I have knowledge. I have seen what they fear most. The room stirred. Elias sighed. He had heard this before, but it still sounded crazy. She's saying the Zephyr aren't afraid of the rebels. They're afraid of what humanity will become. Ro crossed her arms. Explain. Celery took a slow breath. The Zyphar rule because they think they are invincible. But in every path I have seen, there is a moment, one moment, where their empire begins to fall. A pilot with a scared face frowned. And you're saying that moment is now? Celery nodded. Yes, and it starts here. Murmurs spread through the room. Some hopeful, some doubtful. The cybernetic man shook his head. Even if you're right, how do we fight back? We barely have enough ships to defend ourselves. Elias smirked. Then we don't fight fair. The room turned to him. We hit them where it hurts, Elias continued. Sabotage, raids, hit and run, tactics. The Zyphar expect big battles, but they don't expect us. Ro nodded slowly. That's how we've survived this long. But we need something bigger. Celery stepped forward. There is something. The room went quiet again. She pointed at the holographic map in the center of the chamber. Here, she said, selecting a distant system. Zyphar Command Outpost Theta 9. It's a data center. The Zyphar store fleet movements, security codes, and classified information there. A rebel engineer whistled. That kind of intel could change everything. Ro studied the map. It's also heavily guarded. Elias grinned. That's why we do it my way. Ro raised an eyebrow. You have a plan. Elias leaned on the table. We sneak in, grab what we need, and vanish before they know what hit them. The cybernetic man scoffed. You make it sound easy. Elias smirked. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. Ro exchanged a glance with her officers. Then she turned back to Elias and Celery. All right, she said. We have one shot at this. If we pull it off, we might just start something bigger than a rebellion. Celery's glowing eyes flickered. We won't fail. Elias exhaled. He really hoped she was right, because if they were wrong, they wouldn't live long enough to regret it. The Wayfarer moved like a shadow through the darkness of space. It was a simple ship, not built for war, not designed for battle. But tonight, it carried the hopes of a rebellion. Elias Voss sat in the cockpit, his hand steady on the controls. He had pulled off dangerous jobs before, but this was something else. Sneaking into a Zephyr command station, stealing top-secret data, and escaping before being blown to pieces. Yeah, this was definitely the craziest mission of his life. And somehow, he wasn't running away from it. Behind him, Celery stood quietly, her glowing eyes fixed on the station ahead. The Zyphar Command Outpost Theta 9 was massive, a floating fortress surrounded by defense drones and warships. Elias exhaled. All right, Celery, tell me again how we're supposed to sneak in without getting vaporized. Celery turned to him, calm as ever. The station's security grid only scans large ships. If we approach at the right angle, we can slip through undetected. Elias shook his head. You sure about that? Celery gave a small, knowing smile. I have seen it. That didn't exactly make him feel better, but he trusted her. At least more than he trusted their odds of fighting their way in. Breaking in. A few minutes later, the Wayfarer drifted close to the station's outer structure. The ship's engines were at minimum power, barely making a sound. Elias gripped the controls tightly. One wrong move, one wrong signal, and they would be caught. Activating cloaking field, Celery said. A shimmer passed over the ship as their stolen Zyphar tech flickered to life. It wouldn't last long, but it would be enough to get them inside. Elias guided the ship toward a small docking port. The rebels had already hacked the access codes. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark corridor inside the station. Elias turned to Celery and their small team. Ro, the cybernetic soldier Dren, and an expert hacker named Lyra. All right, people, Elias whispered. We move fast, stay quiet, and get what we came for. The team nodded, weapons ready. They stepped inside. The silent hunt. The inside of the station was cold and metallic, the air filled with a low hum of machinery. The halls were empty, but that didn't mean they were safe. Scifi walked ahead, her glowing eyes scanning the paths before them. "This way," she whispered, pointing down a dark corridor. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. The security cameras had been looped by Lyra's hacking, but that wouldn't last forever. After a few tense minutes, they reached the data core chamber. A massive door stood in their way, protected by heavy locks and alarms. Lyra knelt beside the control panel. "Give me a minute," she said, her fingers flying over the screen. Elias kept his blaster ready, scanning the hallway behind them. His instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. Then, "Got it," Lyra whispered. The door slid open. Inside, rows of glowing data servers lined the room, holding secrets that could change the war. Scifi stepped forward, placing her hands on one of the consoles. The markings on her skin pulsed with light. "This is it." Lyra plugged in a small device. "Copying everything now. Just need 60 seconds. Elias exhaled. "That's 60 seconds too long." Because at that moment, alarms blared through the station. The escape. Security breach detected. All units respond immediately. Elias cursed. "Move." Footsteps echoed down the halls. Sci-Fi soldiers, heavily armed and ready for a fight. Dren raised his blaster arm. "I'll hold them off." Elias grabbed his shoulder. "No hero moves. We all leave together." Lyra yanked the device from the console. "Got the data." Scifi's eyes flashed. "Then we must go. Now." They sprinted down the corridor as red lights flashed around them. The station was on full alert. Blaster fire erupted behind them. Dren returned fire, his cybernetic arm glowing as he launched an energy blast that sent the soldiers diving for cover. Elias led them toward the docking bay. The Wayfarer was waiting, but so were more Sci-Fi troopers. "We're trapped," Lyra shouted. Elias gritted his teeth. "Think, Voss, think." Then Scifi stepped forward. She raised her hands, and the air shimmered. For a split second, reality itself seemed to flicker. The Sci-Fi soldiers hesitated, confused, their movements slowing. Elias didn't question it. "Run." They dashed forward, blasters firing. Dren took down 2 guards. Rowe threw a grenade, sending another squad scattering. Elias hit the ship's controls remotely, opening the hatch. One by one, they jumped inside. Elias slammed the doors shut and rushed to the pilot's seat. "Hang on," he shouted as he punched the engines. The Wayfarer roared to life, blasting out of the docking bay just as the station's defense cannons fired. Explosions erupted behind them. Sci-Fi ships launched in pursuit. Elias grinned. "All right, let's see if they can catch us." He pulled the ship into a steep dive, weaving through debris fields. Laser fire streaked past them. Lyra worked frantically at the computer. "I'm setting the jump coordinates." Scifi closed her eyes, her body glowing faintly. Then she whispered, "Now." Lyra hit the button. The Wayfarer vanished into hyperspace, gone before the Sci-Fi could react. Victory. For now. The cockpit was silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Elias leaned back, exhaling. Well, that was fun. Rowe let out a breath. "We got the data. That's what matters." Lyra checked the stolen files. Her eyes widened. "You're not going to believe this." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Try me." She turned the screen toward them. A hidden fleet. Hundreds of ships. A chance to fight back. Scifi met Elias's gaze. "The beginning of the end," she whispered. Elias smirked. "Then let's make history." The Wayfarer soared through hyperspace, its engines humming softly. Inside the ship, the crew sat around the control console, staring at the stolen data. The holographic display flickered, revealing the Sci-Fi Dominion's greatest secret. Elias Voss leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the metal table. So, you're telling me, the Zephyr have an entire hidden fleet just sitting out there? Lyra nodded, her eyes still locked on the screen. Not just a fleet. A war fleet. Hundreds of ships, dormant, waiting for activation. Dren, the cybernetic soldier, crossed his arms. If we can take it, we could turn the tide of the war. Captain Rose studied the map. But where is it? We need to know if we have a chance of reaching it before the Zephyr do. Lyra zoomed in on a set of coordinates, a dark system, far from any trade routes. Omega 42. Cellari's glowing eyes flickered. It is hidden. In the void. The Zephyr fear what they have built. Elias frowned. Why would they fear their own fleet? Cellari took a slow breath. Because it was not meant for them. It was meant to fight something far worse. The room fell silent. Dren clenched his fists. Well, whatever it was meant for, it's ours now. If we move fast, we can claim the fleet before the Zephyr realize we have the data. Elias nodded. Then let's not waste time. He turned to the ship's controls, setting their course for Omega 42, the lost fleet. The journey through hyperspace was tense. No one spoke much, but the air was thick with anticipation. If they could reach the fleet and take control, it would change everything. Hours later, the ship dropped out of hyperspace. Before them stretched a dead star system, cold, empty, and forgotten. And in the darkness, they saw it. A massive graveyard of warships floated in the void, stretching as far as the eye could see. Some were ancient, rusted from time. Others gleamed with untouched power. Elias whistled. That's a lot of firepower. Rose scanned the readings. I'm picking up no life signs, no power signatures. They're offline. Lyra tapped the console. If we can access the main command ship, we might be able to reactivate the whole fleet. Elias smirked. Then let's go claim our new army. The Wayfarer carefully navigated through the silent giants, heading for the largest ship, a Zephyr dreadnought. The Awakening. They docked inside the dreadnought's hangar. As they stepped onto the cold metal floor, the ship felt eerily lifeless. Dren kept his blaster ready. I don't like this. Elias led the way toward the control center. The doors hissed open, revealing an ancient bridge, untouched for years. Cellari moved forward, placing her hand on a console. Symbols lit up beneath her fingers, responding to her presence. She closed her eyes. The ship was waking up. Lights flickered on. Screens activated. Power hummed through the vessel. And then, a deep mechanical voice echoed through the speakers. Unauthorized access detected. Elias swore. That's not good. Lyra's eyes widened. Something's activating. Not just this ship, the whole fleet. Outside, the warships began to glow, their engines coming to life. Ro cursed. If the Zephyr detect this, they'll be on us in minutes. Dren turned to Cellari. Can you take control? Cellari's hands trembled. I am trying. The symbols beneath her pulsed faster. The ship seemed to be fighting her. Then, the screens change, revealing a message. You are not Zephyr. Identify yourself. Elias stepped forward. We're the ones taking this fleet. Now, let us in. Silence. Then, human detected. Authorization granted. Elias blinked. Wait, what? Suddenly, the ship fully powered up. Every warship in the fleet did the same. Cellari gasped. They were waiting for humans. Lyra stared at the controls. I think this fleet was never meant for the Zephyr. Dren's cybernetic arm clenched. Then it's ours now. Rose stepped forward. Then let's take it and strike back. Elias grinned. Now we bring the fight to them. The final war begins. As the rebels took control of the fleet, alarms blared. The Zephyr had detected them. Incoming warships, an entire fleet, ready to destroy them. Elias took his seat at the helm of the dreadnought. He activated the controls. The warships around them came to life. Cellari whispered, This is the moment the Sci-Fi feared. Elias smirked. Then let's give them a reason to be afraid. Outside, the battle for the galaxy was about to begin. The end of the Sci-Fi Dominion had just started.